When I first started at the Center for Injury Research and Policy 10 years ago, I was the proud mom of a 5-year-old little boy, RJ. I was so excited to start my new job and learn about this new field. I started looking at some of the research that had come out of our center, and I was shocked. It seemed like there were 10 million different ways that I could have killed my child already, and I hadn't heard of any of them. I was surprised that I didn't know this information, and I wondered why. And I wondered how we as a center could do a better job of getting this information out there. I made it my mission to find out everything I could about childhood injury, not out of a morbid curiosity, but because I wanted to do better to protect my child. At our center, our goal is to encourage curiosity in children and make sure they stay out and active and playing. Unfortunately for me, my mission earned me a nickname in my family. They like to tease me that I ruin the fun one activity at a time. But it really got me thinking that there was no way I was the only parent that would want to know this information. I also wondered what other research was out there that I didn't know about, and how was I going to find that information? So, being a researcher, I started reading journal articles, and I started attending talks here at the hospital. But I quickly got frustrated. I think I'm pretty smart, but I would often find myself learning about this research and not understanding because I didn't understand the words that people were using or how they were describing their research. They didn't put it in a context for me that I could understand why it would matter for my family. So this got me thinking about the research process and how we are trained to talk about our research. I'm guessing everyone here in this room is familiar with this process. You get an idea, you write a grant, you get some funding, you do the research, and you analyze the data. And then you start to think about where you're going to publish your findings. If you're lucky, you'll get to be published in a prestigious journal like the New England Journal of Medicine, where you'll get 600,000 readers per week learning about your work. You might also get a poster presentation, where you'll get another 10 to 15 people learning about your work. You may even get an oral presentation at a conference, where you'll get to talk to another 50 to 100 people. This is the model we use. After this, we think, I did a great job of getting my research out there, and we pat ourselves on the back. But I'd like us to think about this model. Think about who's reading the article in the journal. Who's coming to talk to you when you give your poster presentation? Who's sitting in the audience when you're giving a talk? Other researchers, and maybe a few healthcare professionals. The problem is we only ever talk to each other. And not only do we only talk to each other, but we have a prescribed formula for what we're going to say. The problem with this formula is that it doesn't give us any room to think about the bigger picture and how we put our findings in context for people. It also affects the language that we use. When you submit your work for publication in a journal or for a presentation, you have to prove the validity of your work to academia. Because we're talking to our peers, it gives us license to use acronyms and jargon and smart-sounding language. But what's missing from this approach? The findings never get to families like mine. To the moms, the dads, the caregivers, we as parents, we want to do the best we can for our families to keep them healthy and safe. But we can't act on information that we don't know about or that we don't understand. You can be the best researcher in the world, but if your findings never get out to families like mine, or if they don't understand why it matters to them, then why are we doing the research in the first place? We need to do a better job. We need to expand our reach. So how are we going to do this? What can we do differently? We can build it into our plans in the first place. When we sit down to write a grant, instead of outreach and communication being an afterthought, we build it in at the beginning planning phases. If you make it a model to talk about when we find X, we will communicate the findings to the affected population by doing Y, right at the beginning of your research, we're going to be a step ahead. I hear a lot, we don't have funding for that in our budget. Our budget can't accommodate outreach and communications. So I challenge you to think about other ways you can get the information out there. Think about the partnerships you can form. Internally, here at our own hospital, you can talk to the education department, marketing, PR, the media team. They're trained to help you get your research story out there, and we've learned today about how important that can be. It's also important to think about where you're getting the information out there. If you think about it, how many families are actually reading journal articles and attending talks? We need to go to them where they are, not where we are. Just this morning, new research came out that found that the #1 place that moms look for healthcare information is the internet. How can we find them there? This slide shows just a few examples of things our own hospital has done to help us tell our research stories. The other thing we can do is change the way we talk. It's really easy for us to change laceration into cut or a fracture into a broken bone so people that can understand. And if you don't think this matters, I'm going to tell you a personal story. A few months ago, I ended up in the emergency department at 2 in the morning with a kidney stone. And I was in incredible amount of pain, and I could not think straight. And the doctor kept asking me, "Are you having flank pain?" And I may have blurted out, "I'm not a flank steak. I don't know what you're talking about. Use a word I understand." If he would have just used a different word, I would have been able to understand what he was talking about. When we talk about statistics in our research, we say things like, from 1999 to 2008, an estimated 931,886 children under 5 years of age were treated in an emergency department in the United States for stair-related injuries, averaging 46.5 injuries per 10,000 population annually. I can't say that in one breath. If I took this off the screen, how many of you would be able to remember that? I had to put it on the slide because I knew I wouldn't be able to remember how to say that. We can take that same data, rework it a little bit, and say it in a different way. Every 6 minutes in the US, a child is treated in a hospital emergency department for a stair-related injury. Same data, much easier to understand and much easier to remember. We can also help put our research in context for families. It may seem silly to people to do research on hot dogs. But when you tell people, if we put the best engineers in the world in a room and ask them to design the perfect plug for a child's airway, they couldn't do much better than a hot dog. It puts it in context. It helps them understand why that research is important and why it matters to them personally. And we know these stories work. I have countless stories of everyday people who have come up and told us afterwards, citing word for word quotes and statistics from research that was published by us years ago. But it's not just enough when we're talking to the public. We also want to think about how we're talking to our colleagues who might not be in our immediate field. We heard from Rob earlier who talked about design, and he has a great story about why this matters. He went to a talk that was given by a nurse who was grappling with a complex problem. Instead of describing the problem using scientific words that might be hard for him to understand, she told a story about a patient. Because Rob could relate to that story about the patient, it helped him think of an idea of how she could solve her problem. He went up and talked to her after the talk, and they now have a $1.4 million grant to build an app that can potentially save lives. Now, I know many of you are sitting here thinking, that's great, but that won't work for me, or that's not going to work for my research. I get it. This can be challenging. This puts us outside of our comfort zone. As researchers, we are trained to follow that specific formula. We aren't trained to give talks like this, or to expand our research, or think about how we talk. My personal experience, I spent more time doing this 10-minute talk than I ever did putting together an hour-long research presentation. And let me tell you, it is terrifying to get up on the stage with no notes. But if I can do it, so can you. If you really want to learn, there are a lot of great resources out there now where you can get training. It's also going to challenge us to leave our egos at the door. As researchers and doctors, it is really difficult for us not to be the smartest person in the room. But if we can put that aside and start to use language that everyone in the room can understand, think about the potential. Think about the people in the audience that might have a solution that you didn't know about, or might open a discussion that will lead to a new direction for your research. And the last slide. There are a group of you who are like this dog who does not want to take a bath. Outreach and communication is not something you're interested in. You love doing research, you love working with the data, but you think getting the message out is for someone else. That's okay. You don't have to. But if you're not going to get the message out, you need to find someone else who will. There are plenty of partners out there who can help you get the information out. In today's day and age, with the technology the way it is, it's easy for us to get information out quickly and relatively inexpensively. So it's no longer okay for us to leave the research at the lab or in the journal. It's not okay for us to have parents go through something that we know how to treat or that we can protect or prevent. I'm going to end my talk with a challenge to you. I encourage each of you to think about how you're talking about your research and what you can do to make it a little bit different, how you can expand your reach. Next time you go to describe your research, pretend like you're telling Aunt Susie at the family reunion. See if you can do it in 2 to 3 sentences without using any technical terms. Next time you go to give a presentation, don't just start building slides with the research findings, the methodology, and the discussion points. But instead, think about what your one take-home message is. If your audience doesn't get anything else, you want them to know that one thing. And how are you going to structure your talk to make sure they understand that? Next time you sit down to write a grant, plan it at the beginning for outreach and communication. Either build it into your grant or identify your partners who are going to disseminate the information for you. I challenge each of you to change something about the way you communicate today. Think about how you're going to expand your reach and how you're going to find your research story. Thank you.